Oh, is that better? Oh, okay, thank you. It's a learning process, thank you. And, yeah, I got you. So, this is Sunday picnic lunch for y'all, and I'm reminiscing about what the committee for the history of the church has been about. And we have Janie White with us. She's the head of the committee. And we meet on Fridays, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. So I'm just here testing the mic and introducing Janie, and she'll take it from you.
If y'all can, I'm going to try talking without the mic. If you can hear me, I'm going to do that. So, okay, I use the mic. And I have different glasses. So I'm Janie White, and I was born to St. Peter's, baptized and confirmed in the St. Peter's Episcopal Church when it was down at the old site. And I'm going in 1991, Texas Historical Marker was dedicated, and my mother, Judy Sorensen Collier, was asked to make some comments. I'm going to use her notes from those comments to tell you about the history of St. Peter's.
Sorry about that.
This is the text of the marker. We have found out some things that are a little bit earlier than 1871, so we'll talk about those later. And Kay's going to change slides for me. My mother, Judy Sorensen Collier, who was a member of St. Peter's all of her life, was asked to make remarks at the dedication of the marker. She was born in 1910, was 81 years old. She's the little white-haired lady in the gray dress there. She was 81 years old in 1991 when the marker was dedicated and this photo was taken. If anybody can help us identify anybody else, the only person who's been able so far to identify is Reverend Walter Clark to her left. When she delivered her remarks, she cited her sources by saying, "My information was taken from the county records, a history of the church written by Miss Lily Dean, later historical facts compiled by Mrs. Paul Reese, and from our present church historian, Gladys Jewel Gibson." Remember, I'm talking about 1991. I have I was baptized here was when I was an infant, and the church was in its original location. Here I began my early Christian training. I was 9 years old when the church was moved after the 1919 storm to Live Oak and Lincoln Streets. And in this photograph, there's a gentleman on the right who is, I'm going to try my pointer, who is my grandfather.
Looking for the cake.
Can you see that little red dot there? That's my grandfather. That's my grandmother. And I know this photograph was prior to 1903 because this is my grandmother's sister named Sister Pearl, and she died in 1903. Let's see. Okay. Okay. In 1867, James N. Doty, John M. Mathis, and Thomas H. Mathis formed a partnership and planted 7.5 Rockport. They donated land to churches and parks. This view of downtown Rockport is not from 1867, but it's around 1910. And the person who sent this postcard out marked some of the churches. The Baptist church was right there, the Presbyterian church right there. St. Peter's was off the photograph over there. Well, over in this area. Back here, it was by the depot. And you'll learn more about that in a minute. She related the building of St. Peter's. The mission of St. Peter's was built in 1871. Sailing vessels brought the lumber from Galveston to build the church. The double front doors were ship's doors and were donated by Captain C.L. Dean. He also donated the bowsprit, which formed an arch over the chancel. You can just see a little bit of the arch up here. The properties of the church, the original altar, which is not in this picture, the altar, lectern, prayer desk, and chancel rail were made from wood of a mail ship that was also donated. The building was completed and dedicated by the Reverend Alexander Gray on St. Andrew's Day, November 30th, 1871. The mission was a beautiful little church, a symbol of love and peace. There was a white picket fence all around it with flowers growing in the yard. There was a stile for the fence as an entrance to the yard. Rockport had no stock land, and cows and horses were allowed to graze on vacant lots. It was a disaster if they got into the churchyard. There were double gates in the fence, a short way from the stop, so wagons could come into the yard to deliver such things as firewood that was delivered for the big old iron stove that heated the church. This photograph probably was the church in its original location. It's not an 1871 photograph, but you can see the picket fence there, and the bell still in the belfry. And I can't identify any of the people in that. When there was a funeral, now this photograph was not from that period. I have to admit, I found it on the web. But when there was a funeral, the horse-drawn hearse came in the yard, making it easier for the pallbearers to carry the in and out of the church. As a child, I'm talking about my mother, not me. As a child, I thought this hearse was the most beautiful carriage I had ever seen. A carriage fit for a prince or a king. It was all glass. On the inside, it was decorated with purple and gold fringe. All around the top with gold tassels hanging at the ends. I thought it would be glorious for anyone to ride in, even if they were in a box. The casket was all covered with a beautiful purple pole when it came out to the church. And then the pole was brought back to the church from the cemetery. It says, to this day, as old as I am, I can still see that beautiful carriage. This is where the church was originally. Railroad up at the top. This is from the January 1906 Sanborn Fire Insurance map. The railroad became North Street. Magnolia Street was here. This would have been North Street down here and Live Oak on the left. I thought this is a particularly good drawing because you can see, this is actually from 1906, and you can see the footprint of the church at that time. The location was very near, the church stood for 50 years on this original location. The location was very near the railroad tracks and the depot. At train time, the noise was such that it was necessary to stop the service until the train passed. There were several trains a day. There was an excursion train from San Antonio every day, brought passengers to the beach, and then went back to San Antonio at night. The black coal smoke from the train covered the white walls of the church.
Sorry about that.
It was impossible to protect our beautiful hangings and white linens. And there was another problem that added to the noise and smoke of the trains. We burned kerosene lamps in 4 beautiful iron fixtures hanging from the ceiling. Each lamp had a brass chain used to lower and raise the lamp. The chimneys had to be cleaned and the wicks trimmed just so. If they were not trimmed just right, or if a breath of wind hit the flame, the church was invaded by hundreds and hundreds of little black angels. They were very difficult to clean up. And I added it a little bit. She also said, of course, the women of the church were required, who were the ones who cleaned everything. St. Peter's was also vulnerable to hurricanes. In the hurricane of 1875, the church was blown down. And that hurricane of 1875 was the one that originally destroyed Indianola. In 1876, the church was rebuilt on the same location, using the same lumber, the same doors, the same fixtures, pews, and furnishings. Okay. In the hurricane, well, I'm going to say something here. This is the intersection of Main and Water Streets before the 1919 storm. If you've ever heard, this was the Del Mar Hotel. It was a 3-story building, could accommodate 150 people in rooms and 300 people for a dance. This was the First National Bank building, and this was a hotel. This was right on the water, and the wharf took the hotel out over the water. I'm sorry? No, this is Water Street, which is, east of that, and Main Street is the one that goes, trying to remember what's there now. Rowdy Mountain is the top, it's on here. Okay. This is that same intersection after the earthquake of 1960. I mean, it's exactly the same intersection, except all of the wharves and the boats were washed in. This isn't bad. Wait, I'll show you something. In a hurricane in 1916, the church was badly damaged. The pews were blown into the chancel and stacked as though men had stacked them there. Our church records were lost in this hurricane. The church was again rebuilt on the same location. And it was after this 1916 hurricane that Mrs. Bruner, and I can't give you any more history on her, we're going to find that. But Mrs. Bruner commissioned Reverend William Smith, a minister from LaGrange, but she commissioned him to build a new altar for St. Peter's as a memorial to her daughter Emma, who had recently died. And that altar built after the 1916 storm is the one we're still using. There's a plaque on the bottom that says that. Services continued at this original location until the 1919 hurricane. After that storm, the bishop, the diocesan board, and the St. Peter's Vestry made the decision to move the church to higher ground. The building in its damaged condition was moved and rebuilt on church property at the corner of Live Oak and Liberty. Yeah. And I'm going to show you some photos of the 1919 storm. This, if anybody is familiar with the old courthouse, this is the old courthouse here. Angel Rose bed and breakfast is right in here. Actually, the church would have been over here a little bit, but this was that area. These were the railroad tracks, and you can see how bad it was. This is another photograph of the area. This was the intersection I just showed you before the 1916 storm. This would have been the Sorensen store, which is now Coastal Mercantile, and this is Austin Street through here. This was the telephone building. Okay. Just another one, just from a different angle. This is the La Playa Hotel. You can just see how much Rockport flooded. This is back to that same intersection that I showed you before the 1916 storm. We're going to rehearse next time. This is that intersection after the 1919 storm. This was the First National Bank. This was the La Playa Hotel. If you've ever heard of Rockport Point, which is where Rockport got its name, the La Playa was on Rockport Point. And if any of you have ever heard of Robert Jackson's descriptions of the 1919 storm, this is the hotel where the people climbed to the third floor and then swam over to what's now Angel Rose Bed and Breakfast, which was the Bronx House at the time. This was the waterfront. This was called the Sorensen Wharf. It was my great-grandfather's. Well, by 1919, he died in 1960. So at that time, 1919, But this is the remains of the Del Mar Hotel. But this is that same wharf after the 1919 storm. Okay. I have to go back to my notes. The church was moved to, does anybody remember where JJ's was before the party? This was where JJ's was. And the entrance faced west. That's where it was moved and rebuilt using as much of the wood and other elements as they could. But this location too became a bad location when Highway 35, Liberty Street, was open to heavy traffic. Highway 35 was called the Hunt the Coast Highway, and it was the main highway from Corpus to Houston, and we still use it. It's Highway 35 is business through town. With the noise of the traffic, it was almost impossible to hold a service. We were unable to open our windows and were denied the breeze to cool the church. But the town undertaker came to our aid by furnishing hand fans with his ad in big black letters on the back. Our pews were full of them. The 10 to 15 people who came to church couldn't use all of them. And at that time, St. Peter's was depending on visiting ministers to come and give us communion. And I don't have a picture for this, but in the late 1940s or early 1950s, I'm not sure when, Harry Carter came to St. Peter's. He was a lay reader. He walked into our lives and was loved by the people of St. Peter's and the whole community. He was here for us every Sunday for morning prayer. St. Peter's became active again.
Is it the same church bell?
Same church bell. Yeah. And then I'm just going to show you, okay, would you go back? I jumped the gun. Okay. In 1953, a new location was found, and the second move was made to the corner of Mimosa and Live Oak, where the little building still stands. The building was designed and reproduced as near as possible. The altar, windows, doors, and some of the arches were preserved. The seating capacity and chancel were enlarged. A new parish hall was added. And then in 1964, St. Peter's was accepted by the Diocese of West Texas as a parish, which meant that the church was self-supporting and ready to stand on its own. The Reverend Harold W. Edmondson was called to be the first full-time priest and rector. And then she finishes up her comments by saying, "This is the story of a small church's life. This is the story of zeal, suffering, hardship, discouragement, and love. This is the story of men and women, generation after generation, who refused to abandon the church when all seemed hopeless. It was God's grace that kept us going in the past. His promise is our future now and beckons us to follow." And I thought, if you want to go back and look at some of the photographs, but for fun, not store pictures, I've added some scenes of what Rockport was like. This is supposedly the first car in Rockport. That's what my mother told me. In the Sorensen collection, I I do have an original of this photograph, and I think this is my grandmother right there. This is in front of the Del Mar Hotel. There's a long history of the Del Mar Hotel. Just to make it short, my great-grandfather, Simon B. Sorensen, ended up owning it until he died, and it was a great expense to him. After about 1910, it never really was a very good hotel anymore. It kind of went into disrepair. This is my grandmother, Lola Herring, and her sister, Sister Pearl. And I think they're in a parade because back here you can see another carriage. This probably was around where the Hoops House is. The streets were not paved, and this would have been along the beach. The horses was my great-grandmother's, and the horse was used to deliver groceries from the Sorensen store. And it knew every place it was going. You just put them in the wagon, and the horse took them. I do not. I wish I did.
You know what? Those are decorated, are those flowers?
I would guess they're flowers. I mean, other choice would be crepe paper, I think. But probably, I don't think they did either. So I'm going to say flowers. Yeah. I do not know what it is. There were several large houses along the beachfront there where, well, now is kind of where the Chamber of Commerce is in that area. This is in front of my grandmother's parents' home. They were the Herrings, and this house was across from, it's right about where American Bank is now. And I put this in here because, again, it's the same horse. But this photograph was taken about 1899, and on the back it says, "Going to church."
Are you related to Jim Herring?
Yes, he is my cousin on the Herring side of the family. Jim and David. I mentioned Mrs. Reese earlier. This is my little red dot's not very big. This was Reverend Paul Reese, and he was a retired Episcopal priest who served St. Peter's for some time in the 1930s. Mrs. Reese was the church historian, and we have her history, which gives us just a whole lot of information about what happened with St. Peter's until she moved to McAllen with her son. This is John Paul, who's the child. We have correspondence with her between Harry Carter and also Bishop Jones. So she was a good historian. Had a lot of other, at one time the little church had painted windows. And we know that's true because Mrs. Reese has an article in her archives about the woman who painted the windows. And I remember the painted windows because as a child, I got to help take all the paint fell off, and I got to help get it, that paint out of the windows. Yeah. And this is the church as it was at we thought we had 1871 as the beginning. But we've been able to trace the beginnings of St. Peter's to Old St. Mary's in 1869. Is anybody familiar with Old St. Mary's? Now it's not even a ghost town, it's not there. But it was a very early port during the Texas Revolution and the Civil War. It was across Covino Bay, about where Bayside is now, but a little farther south. Covino Bay silted up, and the ships carrying lumber and things couldn't get to that location anymore. So everybody moved along. And, but anyway, we found out that there was, let me find the notes here. There was an Episcopal presence at Old St. Mary's. Colonel John H. Allen and Captain F. Bailey were lay readers. And Ruth Douglas has been doing some research on those families for us through ancestry and other things, and has followed them to Rockport. And then when the first church, Episcopal church or chapel was in Rockport, Frederick A. Bailey was a licensed lay reader. And we found at that time, very early, it was called the Church of the Messiah. I do not know when it changed from Church of the Messiah to St. Peter's. More research to do. In case God has found documentation through the Texas Historical Commission that the Fulton family was indeed an active part of St. Peter's. And I have my grandmother's it's a very small wardrobe, and she kept her books on the back of the door. And there is a notation that she paid one of the Fulton girls $3 church dues. And we're also working to identify and document those who, as my mother said, refused to abandon St. Peter's. And we have many photographs to identify and a lot of people to remember. We'd love to have you come join us. We meet every Friday at 2 p.m. I would like to ask the rest of our committee to stand. So these are the ladies we work with every week. And Kate stands here. We have a lot of fun. We really enjoy each other, and anybody is welcome to come with us. That's the Sermon some more if I showed that one earlier.
Where would that be today?
That would be, okay, you know where Coastal Mercantile is? It would have been straight out behind that. And the pledge is. Because the bathhouse, the building there out over the water, with the kind of round thing, that was the bathhouse. And they charged 15 cents for changing rooms there. And you can still see the Del Mar over there. This went right into Water Street. Water Street was kind of the main thoroughfare at that time. I think I'm ready to see if there are any other questions. Okay.
Is the bell that was in the church, is that our same bell?
Yes.
It's interesting because it's a pre-Civil War bell. It was, the foundry was in West
Simon Ulrich Lawrence Christian Sorensen. He came as a seaman. He arrived here in 1866 and had malaria. And he was put off the ship to recover, and then the ship left. And I'm kind of fond of saying, here I am. And his brother, Andrew Sorensen, who was a famous game warden and started Port Bay Hunting Club, came up. Simon was 16 when he came, and Andrew was a baby. And when Andrew was 17, he came to join his brother. So, I'm trying to think if there's anything I should add to that.
Well, I just remember Jimmy, when I was a child, he was friends with my grandfather.
Well, yeah, I remember Jimmy very well. My sister and I were little girls during World War II, and when he came back from the war, he brought us some wonderful things to remember him by.
Didn't St. Peter's predate Ocean Diocese by a couple of years?
Yes, it did.
We couldn't hear what you said.
St. Peter's actually is one of the two earliest churches in the diocese. So St. Peter's is very historic. Do you remember where the other one is? I don't know.
Well, St. Mark's in San Antonio and St. Church of the Advent in Brownsville are both from the 1840s. But I don't, there's another one in addition to.
Yeah, it's up down, it may have been on Coastal Road.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Because there was one down there on Chocolate Mile.
right.
And
Well,
then-
the one that, that work, is that right?
Somewhere.
Yeah, that work, yeah.
If anybody wants to correct me on anything that I have said, I don't mind correcting. If somebody has something to add, it would be fun to know. And I know there's some people here who know my mother. And I hope I did justice to her, but she was very special. Was there another question? It means of the sea. And the Del Mar Hotel was built about 1899, and it was a requirement of, I think, Colonel Lott, who was responsible for bringing the railroad to Rockport. He would bring the railroad if we had a large hotel. Thank you, and I enjoyed that, and hope you did.
Whole family is good. Been here.
If you're gonna do this again sometime too, because there's so much to offer.
You're always filming something. I like it. Hey, when he and I
Forgot to get my nuggies out, so there's some over there. Over there. The calories.
great idea.
I was willing to carry it on my life. Sometimes somebody
recording.